Most arguments don't explode because of what was said. They explode because of how it was said. One careless sentence can turn a small disagreement into a war, and one calm phrase can end a fight before it ever begins. The truth is, you don't need to be louder, smarter, or more aggressive to win an argument. You just need the right words, because when you know exactly what to say and when to say it, you don't lose control of the conversation, you own it. Today, I'm giving you the top phrases that will instantly shift power in any argument. Control the emotional temperature before controlling the conversation is the foundation of every powerful argument, because nothing productive ever happens when emotions are running hotter than logic. The moment voices rise, hearts race, or someone feels attacked, the brain switches into survival mode, and once that happens, nobody is listening anymore, they are only reacting. You can have the strongest facts, the clearest explanation, and the most reasonable position, but none of it will matter if the other person feels threatened or disrespected. That is why the first goal in any argument is not to win, not to convince, not even to be understood, but to lower the emotional intensity in the room. When you stay calm while the other person is emotional, you instantly change the dynamic because calm is grounding and emotion is contagious, and the person who controls their emotional state controls the direction of the conversation. Most people think power comes from speaking louder or pushing harder, but real power comes from being the one who does not get pulled into the storm. When someone throws accusations, raises their voice, or becomes defensive, your nervous system has two choices: to mirror their chaos or to remain steady, and the moment you remain steady, you become the anchor that the conversation has to revolve around. This does not mean you suppress your feelings or pretend not to care. It means you choose not to let your feelings drive your words. There is a huge difference between being emotional and being emotionally aware, and emotionally aware people notice what they feel without letting it hijack their behavior. When you speak slowly, keep your tone even, and avoid sharp or sarcastic language, you send a signal that this conversation is safe, and when a conversation feels safe, people lower their guard. Once their guard is down, they become more open to hearing you. But as long as they feel under attack, they will keep defending even if they are wrong. Controlling the emotional temperature also protects you because when you get reactive, you say things you cannot take back, you escalate conflicts that could have ended, and you give away your power by letting someone else dictate how you feel. Staying calm does not mean you are weak, it means you are disciplined, and discipline is always stronger than impulse. When you are the calmest person in the room, you are the one setting the pace, the one guiding the energy, and the one who decides whether this turns into a fight or a conversation. The right phrase can stop conflict instantly because words do more than communicate ideas. They shape how safe or unsafe a moment feels. And in the middle of an argument, people are not really listening to what you are saying. They are listening to how it makes them feel. A single sentence delivered in the wrong tone or with the wrong intention can light a fuse that turns a simple disagreement into a full emotional explosion, while one calm, intentional phrase can bring everything back down before it goes too far. This is why mastering arguments is less about having better logic and more about choosing better words, because when emotions are high, logic has very little influence. The right phrase works like a reset button for the nervous system. It tells the other person that they are not in danger, that they are not being attacked, and that they do not have to keep fighting to protect themselves. When someone feels heard, even if you do not agree with them, their emotional intensity begins to drop, and once it drops, the argument loses its fuel. Simple phrases like asking for clarification, acknowledging how they feel, or slowing the pace of the conversation have a powerful effect because they shift the focus from winning to understanding. People often think they need to say something clever or powerful to end a conflict, but in reality, the most effective phrases are usually the simplest ones, the ones that remove threat and invite calm. When you say something that lowers the emotional temperature, you interrupt the cycle of attack and defense, and that interruption is where control is regained. Without that interruption, arguments keep spiraling because each person keeps reacting to the last thing that was said. The right phrase breaks that chain reaction. It creates a pause, and in that pause, people have a chance to breathe, think, and choose a different response. That is why timing and tone matter just as much as the words themselves, because even a good phrase delivered with irritation or sarcasm will fail to do its job. When your voice is steady and your words are respectful, they carry a kind of quiet authority that pulls the other person back toward balance. You are not trying to overpower them. You are guiding the energy of the conversation to a calmer place. Over time, when you consistently use the right phrases in tense moments, people start to respond differently to you, not because you are intimidating, but because your presence makes things feel less volatile and more controlled. Calm confidence beats loud logic because arguments are not decided by who has the best facts. They are decided by who feels the most grounded in the moment. When someone is loud, fast, and emotionally charged, it can look like strength, but what it really reveals is a lack of control, and people instinctively trust the person who appears steady over the one who appears frantic. Calm confidence sends a message without needing to explain itself. It says, I am not threatened by this conversation. I am not afraid of disagreement, and I do not need to rush or raise my voice to be taken seriously. That kind of energy changes the way others interact with you because it creates a sense of stability in the middle of tension. Loud logic, on the other hand, is when someone keeps throwing facts, arguments, and explanations at the other person in a desperate attempt to prove they are right. But the more they push, the more the other person resists, because no one likes to feel cornered or overwhelmed. When you speak calmly and confidently, you give your words space to land, and that space makes them more powerful. You do not need to overexplain, justify, or defend every point, because your tone already communicates that you trust your own position. People are far more likely to listen to someone who is composed than someone who is trying to force agreement. Calm confidence also keeps you from getting dragged into emotional traps, because when you do not react to provocation, the other person often runs out of momentum. They may start out loud and intense, but when they are met with quiet steadiness, their energy has nothing to bounce off of, and it begins to fade. This does not mean you stay silent or passive. It means you speak with intention instead of impulse. Every word you choose is deliberate, and every pause is controlled, and every response is rooted in self-respect rather than the need to win. That is what gives calm confidence its weight. It comes from knowing who you are and where you stand without needing to convince anyone else of it. When you embody that kind of presence, arguments become less about proving something and more about setting the tone, because the person who controls the tone controls the entire exchange. You don't have to prove everything to win, because most arguments are not really about facts. They are about power, identity, and who feels respected in the moment. When you feel the urge to prove yourself, it usually comes from a fear of being misunderstood, judged, or seen as wrong, and that fear pushes you to over-explain, over-justify, and over-defend. The problem is that the more you try to prove your side, the more you invite the other person to keep attacking it, because every explanation gives them something new to challenge. This turns the conversation into a never-ending loop where you are always on the defensive, always trying to convince, and always giving the other person control of the direction. Real strength in an argument comes from knowing that you do not owe anyone unlimited access to your reasoning. You can state your position clearly and then let it stand without turning it into a courtroom trial. When you keep repeating yourself, adding details, and trying to make them understand, you communicate insecurity, not clarity, because it looks like you need their approval for your viewpoint to be valid. People are more likely to respect someone who is comfortable with being disagreed with than someone who is desperate to be accepted. By not trying to prove everything, you remove the pressure from the conversation and you stop feeding the conflict. You are no longer performing for them. You are simply expressing yourself. This also shifts the power balance, because now the other person has to decide how they will respond to your boundary instead of how they will tear apart your explanation. You become less reactive and more grounded, and that groundedness is what makes your words carry weight. When you choose not to engage in endless justification, you are saying, without saying it, that your perspective is enough on its own. You do not need to be cross-examined for it to matter. This approach also protects your energy, because arguing to prove yourself is exhausting and usually unproductive, while stating your truth and stepping back keeps you clear and composed. Over time, people learn that pushing you for more and more reasons does not work, and that alone changes how they treat you in disagreements, because you are no longer someone they can easily pull into a defensive spiral. Boundaries end arguments faster than explanations, because explanations invite debate, while boundaries bring clarity, and clarity is what stops emotional tug-of-war from continuing. When you explain yourself, you open the door for the other person to question, criticize, or twist your words, but when you set a boundary, you are not asking for approval, you are stating what you will and will not accept. That immediately changes the tone of the interaction, because it shifts the conversation from trying to convince someone to simply defining your limits. Most arguments drag on because both people keep trying to change each other's mind, and that back and forth creates friction, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. A boundary cuts through that by drawing a line that does not need to be defended. You are no longer arguing about who is right, you are telling them how you will participate. This is powerful because it takes away their ability to keep pulling you into the same cycle. Instead of saying why something bothers you over and over, you say what you are going to do about it, and that puts the responsibility back on them to decide how they will respond. Boundaries are not about controlling the other person, they are about controlling yourself, and that is why they are so effective. When you calmly say that you are not willing to continue a certain kind of conversation, or that you will step away if the tone becomes disrespectful, you are not attacking, you are protecting your space. That kind of self-respect is hard to argue with because it does not rely on them agreeing with you. Explanations can always be challenged, but boundaries simply exist. The more you try to justify your limits, the weaker they appear because it makes them seem negotiable. When you state them clearly and stick to them, they become solid. Over time, people learn that pushing past your boundaries does not get them what they want. It only ends the interaction. This naturally reduces conflict because there is no reward for continuing to fight. You are not escalating, you are disengaging from what does not serve you. And that quiet firmness often does more to end an argument than 1,000 well-constructed reasons ever could. The person who stays grounded stays in control because emotional stability is the true source of influence in any disagreement. And when someone loses their emotional balance, they also lose their ability to steer the interaction. Groundedness means you are aware of what you feel without being ruled by it, and that awareness gives you a kind of internal space that reactive people do not have. In an argument, most people get pulled into the other person's intensity, their raised voice, their frustration, their accusations, and once that happens, the conversation turns into a battle of reactions instead of a dialogue. The grounded person does not get swept up in that current. They remain centered, breathing, thinking, and choosing their responses instead of blurting them out. This immediately shifts the power dynamic because now one person is responding with intention while the other is simply reacting. The one who is intentional always has the upper hand. When you stay grounded, you are not rushing to defend yourself, you are not trying to interrupt, and you are not scrambling to prove anything. You are listening just enough to understand what is being said while still staying connected to your own calm. That calm becomes contagious even if the other person does not realize it at first. Their nervous system begins to slow down when it is not being met with equal aggression. Over time, their tone often softens, not because you forced them to change, but because your groundedness created a different emotional environment. Being grounded also protects you from manipulation because when you are emotionally centered, it is much harder for someone to provoke you into saying or doing something you will regret. You can recognize when someone is trying to push your buttons and simply choose not to press them. That choice is what gives you control. You are no longer dancing to someone else's emotional rhythm. You are setting your own. In that space, you can decide when to speak, when to pause, and when to walk away, and those decisions are what truly shape how an argument unfolds. The person who stays grounded is not the loudest or the most forceful, but they are the one who quietly holds the reins of the entire interaction. Words can either invite peace or provoke chaos because every sentence carries an emotional charge that goes far beyond its literal meaning, and in the middle of an argument, people are extremely sensitive to that charge. The same idea can be received in completely different ways depending on how it is delivered because tone, timing, and phrasing all signal whether you are a threat or an ally. When your words sound sharp, dismissive, or absolute, they trigger defensiveness, and once someone feels attacked, their focus shifts from understanding to self-protection. That is when chaos begins, because now both people are trying to shield themselves instead of solve anything. On the other hand, when your words are calm, respectful, and measured, they create a sense of safety, and safety is what allows difficult conversations to happen without turning into fights. You can say something firm without being harsh, and you can be honest without being cruel, but it requires awareness of how your language will land on the other person. Many arguments escalate not because of what was said, but because of the way it was framed. A single sarcastic remark or cutting comment can undo minutes of progress, while a thoughtful phrase can pull the conversation back from the edge. When you choose your words carefully, you are essentially choosing what kind of emotional environment you want to create. If you want resolution, your words need to leave room for it. If you want to dominate, your words will likely push the other person into resistance. People mirror the energy they receive, so if you bring hostility, you will get hostility back. But if you bring steadiness, you often get steadiness in return. This does not mean the other person will immediately become calm, but it does mean you are not adding fuel to the fire. Over time, your consistent choice of peaceful language changes how people interact with you, because they learn that conversations with you do not have to turn into emotional battles. You become someone who can hold tension without letting it explode, simply by the way you speak and the care you take with each phrase you choose in the heat of the moment. Words can either invite peace or provoke chaos because every sentence carries an emotional charge that goes far beyond its literal meaning. And in the middle of an argument, people are extremely sensitive to that charge. The same idea can be received in completely different ways depending on how it is delivered, because tone, timing, and phrasing all signal whether you are a threat or an ally. When your words sound sharp, dismissive, or absolute, they trigger defensiveness. And once someone feels attacked, their focus shifts from understanding to self-protection. That is when chaos begins, because now both people are trying to shield themselves instead of solve anything. On the other hand, when your words are calm, respectful, and measured, they create a sense of safety, and safety is what allows difficult conversations to happen without turning into fights. You can say something firm without being harsh, and you can be honest without being cruel, but it requires awareness of how your language will land on the other person. Many arguments escalate not because of what was said, but because of the way it was framed. A single sarcastic remark or cutting comment can undo minutes of progress, while a thoughtful phrase can pull the conversation back from the edge. When you choose your words carefully, you are essentially choosing what kind of emotional environment you want to create. If you want resolution, your words need to leave room for it. If you want to dominate, your words will likely push the other person into resistance. People mirror the energy they receive, so if you bring hostility, you will get hostility back, but if you bring steadiness, you often get steadiness in return. This does not mean the other person will immediately become calm, but it does mean you are not adding fuel to the fire. Over time, your consistent choice of peaceful language changes how people interact with you, because they learn that conversations with you do not have to turn into emotional battles. You become someone who can hold tension without letting it explode, simply by the way you speak and the care you take with each phrase you choose in the heat of the moment. Strategic silence is also a powerful phrase because not every moment in an argument requires words, and sometimes the most effective response is the one you choose not to give. When someone is emotional, confrontational, or trying to provoke you, they are often looking for a reaction more than they are looking for a solution, and silence denies them that reward. It creates a pause where their own words have to sit in the air, and in that pause, people often become aware of how they sound. Silence can feel uncomfortable, but that discomfort is what gives it its power because it interrupts the usual pattern of attack and response. Instead of being pulled into defending yourself or explaining, you stay present and composed, which signals that you are not easily controlled by someone else's emotions. Strategic silence is not about ignoring or dismissing. It is about choosing not to engage in a way that escalates the situation. By not rushing to fill the space, you give yourself time to think, breathe, and decide what you actually want to say rather than blurting out something you might regret. This also shifts the balance of the interaction because the person who is talking often feels compelled to keep going when there is no response, and in doing so, they sometimes reveal more than they intended. Your quiet presence becomes a mirror that reflects their behavior back to them without a single word. Silence also communicates confidence because you do not feel the need to justify yourself or fight for every point. You know who you are and what you mean, and that inner certainty allows you to be still even when things are tense. When used intentionally, silence can calm an argument just as much as a well-chosen phrase because it removes the emotional fuel that keeps the conflict alive. People often slow down, soften their tone, or even rethink what they are saying when they realize they are not being met with immediate resistance. In that way, silence becomes a subtle form of leadership in the conversation, guiding it away from chaos and toward clarity without ever raising your voice or forcing a point. Arguments are not won by shouting louder, proving more, or dominating the other person. They are won by mastering the way you show up, the energy you carry, and the words you choose. Every phrase, every pause, every boundary you set either gives away your power or protects it. And when you consistently apply these tools, you shift the dynamic of every disagreement. You become the calm in the storm, the voice that guides instead of reacts, and the presence that commands respect without demanding it. Mastering these phrases is not about manipulation. It is about clarity, control, and self-respect, because the person who stays composed, confident, and intentional always shapes the conversation more than anyone who is loud, reactive, or desperate to be understood. In the end, true mastery of an argument is not about defeating someone else. It is about maintaining your own power, presence, and peace while navigating the tension around you.